Hey everyone, this is D, Movieman, fellow cinephile, popcorn addict, and emerging film critic, coming to you with reliable recaps, reviews, and reactions. And today, at long last, I'm coming to you all with my ranking / list of my top 7 favorite films from 2021. And yes, I said favorite and not best. I feel like best comes with a certain stigma. And since I don't know if I've seen the best films this year, I haven't seen all of them. So I decided to make it more personal and just reflect on the films that made me laugh, made me cry, resonated with me, had me walking out the theater like, yes, that is what I was looking for. All right, and I'm going to start with my honorable mention. This is most certainly going to be an unpopular opinion, but that's actually part of the reason why I'm including it. My honorable mention goes to Black Widow, directed by Kate Shortland. My expectations for this film were quite low, but with the exception of Spider-Man No Way Home, I enjoyed Black Widow significantly more than a lot of the other MCU projects we got this year, and there were plenty of them. I love the darker tone of this. I was actually shocked by how intense and gritty this got. I felt like the humor wasn't quite as emphasized here, which I can appreciate because we know how the MCU can be. I also love how grounded the action was. We're not dealing with superpowers here. And I love the hand-to-hand combat and the more practical action that we saw. I also thought the casting was on point. Florence Pugh as Yelena, of course, she was the standout here, and she even stole the film away from Scarlett Johansson. I thought David Harbour and Rachel Weisz as Alexei and Melina, I thought they were excellent also, and I just thought all 4 of them as the family unit, I thought they had such great chemistry together, comedic and dramatic. Even without initially knowing the source material for Taskmaster, I didn't think that the twist with that character worked at all. And then, of course, the fact that this was made after the events of Endgame, and the fact that Marvel / Disney did not trust enough in their audience or in Natasha or Black Widow as a character to have not made this film years ago. But in the end, much like Wonder Woman 1984, I think a lot of the conversation and the criticism and the negativity surrounding this film is much ado about nothing. I can understand them being disappointing, but going on and on about how they're the worst comic book movies ever made, and they're a disgrace to the MCU, they're a disgrace to the DCU, blah, 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 blah. Moving on. So, at number 7, we have A Quiet Place Part 2, written, produced, and directed by John Krasinski. As I mentioned in my review, I thought the first film was such a unique experience, not just as a film, but even the theater experience of watching a film in almost complete silence. And as we're being immersed in this post-apocalyptic world, I love that we were getting this fresh, unique twist with that. And throughout the film, we're getting these very subtle hints about what has occurred in order to create the world that we are now seeing. So I love that with this sequel, not only do we continue from where we left off, but we are bringing things full circle by seeing what happened literally on day 1. And then moving from this very isolated space of the Abbott family's home, venturing outwards and seeing how the world itself has been impacted, and following the Abbott family as they face an even more uncertain future. I did not, and I mean do not, appreciate how Jaimon Hansu was wasted in this role. But, all things considered, a really, really solid sequel, and I hope that we can close out with a third part that is equally solid, if not better. At number 6, we have Dune, aka Dune Part 1, directed by Denis Villeneuve. I had no real expectations for Dune. I was familiar with the source material from afar. I was familiar with the book series. I was familiar with the past film, but I really didn't know anything about Dune personally. I think what stands out immediately about Dune is the scope and the scale of it. Not to mention the cinematography, the visuals, the score by Hans Zimmer, and the overall vision and direction for this film. It is unlike anything that I have seen in a really, really long time. And I think sometimes films like this are at a bit of a disadvantage because their source material is so much older, but then we've seen adaptations or we've seen other projects that have come after it that have made a significant impact in that genre. For instance, Dune is based on Frank Herbert's 1965 novel, which in turn inspired George Lucas, who went on to make Star Wars in 1977. So after seeing so much Star Wars for so many years, it's easy to look at something like Dune and say like, oh, this was inspired by Star Wars when it's actually the opposite. And despite that, I think this film does a fairly solid job of distinguishing itself from Star Wars and even Star Trek, and it establishes its own identity and its own world. And the casting and the performances here absolutely help elevate the story. Rebecca Ferguson as Lady Jessica was my personal standout, followed by Oscar Isaac as Duke Leto Atreides. I thought they were both excellent, and the cast as a whole does a pretty solid job as well. My biggest issue, of course, is that this film is extremely sluggish. The pacing is a bit rough, and although I do not mind slow-moving films, I think having a film that is 2 hours and 36 minutes and doesn't completely flesh out the characters, completely flesh out the story, and has limited dialogue and things like that, it can be a bit of a trial trying to get all the way through and still stay invested. That's in addition to how this film is very much dependent on part two to tell the complete story. So in some ways, this doesn't feel like it's telling a complete story, even though it kind of is. But from what I've seen here, I have enough investment and enough excitement to see Dune Part 2 and to see what has been created and established in this first film continue in the second. And at number 5, we have Zack Snyder's Justice League. As someone whose personal introduction to superheroes as a child was Batman Returns, Batman Mask of the Phantasm, and Batman the Animated Series, seeing the awkward progression of the DCEU years later has been disheartening to say the least. Do I think they're bad films? No. Do I think they're incredibly misguided films? Yes. And there is obviously not a clear and consistent vision for those films, especially with Warner Brothers wreaking havoc and pulling rank and doing things with these films that I still do not understand. I personally recall going to see the Justice League years ago, and although it wasn't the worst film I had ever seen, it just felt so like, yeah, it just was not what I expected. Even after what I'd already seen been built up to that point, I was just like, this is not it. So it was pretty shocking finding out what was going on behind the scenes, and I think we all know that story by now. I hoped that we might see this one day, but I wasn't certain that it would ever happen. So finally getting the chance to see Zack Snyder's Justice League the way it was intended to be made from the beginning, man, I don't really know what to say, but I just know that this film hit home in ways that I was not ready for. It was mind-blowing to me because even with all things considered, having seen the first, this felt like a completely different film, like night and day. I felt like justice was done to every single character here. Each one felt needed, significant, and important. And it really emphasized just how much each character brought to the table individually, as well as in a group. Ray Fisher as Cyborg, that is who I was most excited to see back when this was first announced and we went through the process and the film was going to come out. That's who I was most excited for, but when I saw the film, of course, I was like, oh no. So you have to imagine me watching this film and watching Cyborg's story arc and seeing just the culmination of that and seeing it live up to everything I wanted it to be years ago. Come on. Even Steppenwolf as an antagonist was done justice, and I enjoyed his backstory and his story arc. And even the ending. Spoilers, but the fact that they lose and how Barry / the Flash just comes in and it was like magic. I was blown away. Now, there are some moments where this gets a little bit self-indulgent, and I can understand why pieces of it definitely needed to be trimmed down. Old girl sniffing the sweater, I still don't get that, but okay. But still, what a satisfying experience. I'm so glad that Zack Snyder's vision was able to be appreciated and seen by so many. And I'm also glad that people can really see just how much studio interference and how the right or wrong director can really make or break a film. And at number 4, we have The Night House, directed by David Bruckner. I absolutely enjoy Rebecca Hall as an actress, and I love that in addition to her lead role in this film, she also made her directorial debut with Passing. So 2021 has definitely been a good year to her. I always talk about how I have been a horror story fan since I was very, very young. And for me, some of the most impactful horror stories are ones that reflect real life fears and real life circumstances. So for me, this focus narratively on grief and how the film really fleshes that out and ties it in with this whole supernatural piece, I thought it really took the film to another level. I think that piece helped take this from just an average horror film or even just a film with horror elements to a film that had something really significant to say with a lot of nuance and depth. And ultimately, it is Rebecca Hall's performance that brings this all together. This is basically her one woman show, and I think she knocks it out of the park. The twists, the turns, the reveals, I was into it the entire time. I do think there are some aspects of the film that do more telling than showing, and I would say the finale feels somewhat flat compared to what we get prior, but it still didn't take away from the experience. And overall, I thought the quiet impact and execution of this film really spoke volumes. And at number 3, we have West Side Story, directed by Steven Spielberg. Reimagining or recreating any film comes with certain stigmas.
Where are the new ideas? Why are we tampering with an original?
So imagine choosing to do that with a film that has the type of cultural and historical significance that West Side Story has. Quite the challenge. But what Steven Spielberg does with this reimagining of West Side Story is nothing short of brilliant. Steven Spielberg himself has talked about how West Side Story was actually the first piece of popular music that his family ever allowed into his home, and how he fell completely in love with it as a child. Which makes absolute sense because you can see the love and you can see the appreciation that Steven Spielberg has for the source material here, and how that drives his ability to elevate even what we've seen before in this new take on that story. The direction, the camera work, the cinematography is unbelievable. It felt so lush, so rich, so vibrant, every scene, every moment. And I feel that not only was it showing love to West Side Story and its distinction as a musical, but in some ways, even with the style and the visuals, it felt like it was paying homage to old school Hollywood and the musicals of that era. The cast is phenomenal across the board. As soon as I saw Ariana DeBose in the trailer as Anita, I knew immediately. I was like, I'm going to love her performance. And I was not wrong. Much like Rita Moreno in the original West Side Story, Ariana DeBose proves why Anita is still the best character in West Side Story. And by extension, why America is still the best musical number in West Side Story. I will say that not all the songs are as effective. The pacing is off in some spots. And although I do understand the romantic context of the story, especially with Romeo and Juliet as an inspiration, attempting to swallow certain aspects of Tony and Maria's relationship had me like,
Okay, it's getting weird.
Still, I have to say that in a world where remakes are rampant, I do believe that Steven Spielberg's take on West Side Story establishes itself as a brilliant readaptation that also honors the legacy of the original. And at number 2, we have The Last Duel, directed by Ridley Scott. So this film was not high on my list, especially when I saw some of the casting. Jodie Comer was my main draw to see this, especially because my introduction to her was in The White Princess as Elizabeth of York. And after watching this, I quickly realized that Jodie Comer is the film. That's not to discount anyone else, but man, she had me captivated the entire time. There is a scene in this film where Marguerite is being told by the court what will happen to her if her husband loses this duel. You need to watch that scene. That is all that I will say. Adam Driver also does an excellent job. It was so hard to see him as this character because I've gotten used to just a certain type of character that he plays. But that is actually a good thing. And with Marriage Story and this film and then House of Gucci, he has shown that he is an actor that can absolutely be flexible and transform from one role to the next. And I even have to give kudos to Ben Affleck here. He is not a favorite of mine, but his character and his performance ended up being an unexpected highlight. Lastly, I appreciate how this film deals with some very sensitive subjects, but how it also deals with perception and how one can perceive a very specific event in different ways. And I actually liked how subtle the details were in regards to that also. And that final duel, yes. I only had one major problem with this film. Moving on. And finally, my number one favorite film of the year. If you've been following me, if you've seen my review, it's probably not hard to figure out. And that is none other than Last Night in Soho, directed by Edgar Wright. Feel free to check out my review for more extensive details, but the cinematography, the score, the camera work, casting, performances, everything just came together so beautifully. Thomasin McKenzie, Anya Taylor-Joy, and Diana Rigg, they are so excellent in this. And the film and the story and what it has to say and how it goes to some places I really wasn't expecting, I was here for all of it. I will say, after watching it a second time, I can see where the momentum drops moving from the second act over to the third. And there's some really repetitive story beats there. And it does get somewhat muddled as we close things out. But overall, I still didn't have the massive issue with the third act that everyone else did. As a whole, this film really did resonate with me. And although it may not be up to the standard of Edgar Wright's previous films, I think this shows that he is willing to experiment and take things in a whole new direction. And I am more than excited to see what that is going to look like. And that officially wraps up my ranking of my favorite films from 2021. You guys feel free to leave your thoughts below. Let me know if you agree, if you disagree, and of course, what your favorites were. So, once again, this is D, Movieman, signing off, and I'll see you at the movies.